Hello everyone and welcome to another video. It's been nearly a year and a half since the release of my ThinkPad x250 review, and it's still running strong to this day. But as I look back on that video, I realised all the mistakes I made in it, and so I thought I'd at least partly right those in this new video. So let's take a look back at the ThinkPad x250 almost 7 years later. So first off, let's take a look at pricing. If we look at eBay, we can see that an i5 5200U, 4GB of RAM and 500GB hard drive model costs around £110, and a higher i5 model with better displays, 8GB of RAM and an SSD costs £150 to £160, with the top end i7 models typically costing around £200. I would say go for the mid-range i5s, as an SSD is a necessity for the modern age, and the 8GB of RAM won't go to a waste. And while yes, you could upgrade one of the lower end ones for probably about a similar price, it will be a slightly worse CPU, as the mid-range ones usually have a 5300U instead of a 5200U, and possibly a worse display. As for the value of the i7 ones, I can't speak for them as I've never owned one, but I would guess that the power of it isn't going to be worth the extra cost. The 1366x768 display on my model isn't that bright. It's slightly undersaturated, but it does the job for Word documents, web browsing, and basic video playback. But for color accurate work, it should never be used. Despite this fact, I have actually edited my fair share of 1080p videos on it, and it performed fine and the videos came out looking okay. I've also used it for some light photoshopping, and it performed again fine. Only slowing down for when loads of effects were used, and Fusion 360 was also quite good on the lower resolution display due to the fact that it is easier for the integrated graphics to run. So if you're trying to do basic CAD work, I would say go for a lower end display. But if you want to do anything else, I would say go for the 1080p display models. In terms of portability, the x250 is a bit on the chunky side, as seen by these side-by-sides with several of my friends' laptops. With that said, I wouldn't say it's unusable, just something to take into account before purchasing. A benefit of the large size is the versatility, as the I/O is still amazing for this modern age. It enables a full triple monitor setup with a keyboard, mouse, microphone and headset with only one dongle to adapt the mini DisplayPort to HDMI. So with all the I/O we have a Lenovo charging port, a VGA cable, a USB 3.0 port, and a mini DisplayPort on the left, and on the right, a Kensington lock, a full-size RJ45 1GB Ethernet port, a full-size SD card slot, a micro SIM slot, and another USB 3.0 port. Oh, and a 3.5mm headphone jack just to round it off. Another perk of the large design is the removable battery. One on the inside can be present, it's not in my model though, as well as a removable one for on-the-go hot swapping. I have the largest available external battery, and it gets about 3 to 4 hours when browsing the web constantly. But this is with a 7-year-old battery at this point, so I'd recommend an upgrade to a new internal and external battery for about £15 each on eBay. The overall build quality of the device is very nice for a laptop in this price range, and will vastly outperform modern budget laptops, which are typically Chromebooks now, in both performance and in build quality, with an amazing hinge, nice feeling palm rest, and a nice keyboard. Speaking of the keyboard, it is one of the highlights of the laptop for me, as it has a satisfying sound and feel, as well as plenty of travel, making it easy for me to get up to my full typing speed. My only problem with it is the unusual position of the FN key, as it is swapped with the normal position of the control key, though you do get used to it after a little bit. The trackpad is another highlight for me, as despite its small size compared to things like MacBooks, the drivers more than make up for it. It has a smooth surface that my fingers glide across easily, and the software is great. Gestures such as 2-finger swiping work perfectly fine for me, but zooming in and zooming out can be kind of hard. The laptop also comes equipped with a nipple and buttons to go along with it. I find myself never touching the nipple and just using the extra buttons to add due to their travel and better positioning compared to the more traditional location of these kind of buttons at the bottom of the trackpad. In my last video on the laptop, I was asked about the speakers in the comment section. So how do they sound? Honestly, pretty terrible, but I wouldn't expect that much from them. They weren't designed for cinematic sound stages and movie watching, more for Windows notifications and basic video playback, which they handle fine. The microphone and webcam are also passable for basic video calls, but not the best and not the level of a higher end laptop. The headphone amp is also nothing to rave about, but it gets the job done. Now let's take a quick look under the hood to see the upgradeability and specs of this laptop. For RAM, we have a single DDR3 SODIMM slot, and mine comes equipped with 8GB of 1600MHz RAM. The maximum it can take is 16 gigs. For CPU, we have a Broadwell i5-5200U clocked at 2.2 GHz with a max boost clock of 2.7 GHz, but from my experience, the cooler it usually sits around 2.5 GHz mark when not throttling due to battery constraints. Its graphics only consist of Intel HD 5500, but they work in a pinch for decoding video and 2D games. For storage, I normally have a 128GB 2.5-inch SSD, but for benchmarks, I'm switching to a 200GB SSD. Oh, and a fresh install of Windows. In terms of daily usability, it still fulfills this perfectly fine, with Windows booting up nice and quick on my SSD, and I'm mostly responsive, only having slowdowns when like 10 programs are open at once. Chrome is my browser of choice, and it handles it fine, as with many tabs open at the same time, documents, videos, and all working fine. It can even handle 1080p video playback on YouTube, depending on the internet, but I prefer 720p due to the display on my model. The basic Wi-Fi included managed to get 115 down and 135 up on my home Wi-Fi, which is really good and amazingly usable for everything. That score was taken on a very good day, and it typically gets yet less around that, usually around 30 to 50 megabits and 10 up. So it just depends on the situation, but it is serviceable when it works. For operating system, I run Windows 10 on all the latest updates, but I'm sure many of you would be interested in how Windows 11 would run. So is it possible to run actually? Unfortunately, apparently it was not able to due to not having a TPM 2.0. But if you're doing a clean install instead of upgrading from Windows 10, it should work fine. I've not tested this for myself, so try your own way. So now, let's take a look at the gaming performance of the ThinkPad x250 in the benchmarks. First up for games, we have BeamNG Drive at 720p on the lowest settings. With this, it achieved an average of 14 FPS with 1% lows of 11 FPS and 0.1% lows of 10 FPS. Performance like this is amazing for anything, except for crashing cars into each other and maybe the cliff map, as they don't really have that much gameplay and are just fun spectacles to look at. Manhattan Time was next, and again on 720p all low settings, it achieved an average of 17 FPS with 1% lows of 10 FPS and 0.1% lows of 8 FPS. Once again, we have an unplayable experience due to the nature of the platforming. So far it's not looking good for the 3D performance of the x250. City Skylines was run at 800 by 600 on the lowest settings and achieved an average of 13 FPS with 1% lows of 9 FPS and 0.1% lows of 8 FPS. Now, due to the nature of this game, I would argue that this performance may actually be usable, depending on your classing of that word, but I would use this if I really wanted to play this game. I had no other options. Minecraft was tested at 1366 by 768 on low with a render distance of 8 chunked and achieved an average of 35 FPS and a 1% low of 5 FPS and 0.1% lows of 3 FPS. This was on 1.18 on a single player world and was very playable. These results line up with my previous experiences with Minecraft and this laptop. Now for our 2D title and our final title, we have Into the Breach. This was run at 1080p at the normal settings and achieved an average of 53 FPS with 1% lows of 31 FPS and 0.1% lows of 24 FPS. So for those 2D titles, I could say it could handle them just fine. So that's the ThinkPad x250, and personally, I still think it's holding up fine with decent performance in day-to-day and a great budget price of under £200. Overall, making this a good laptop. My main complaint with it would be the weak battery life, but that is a compromise anyone looking for a laptop used is going to have to make. And so, with that, thank you everyone so much for watching. Please comment if you've got anything to add, like and subscribe. See ya!